Hello there, and welcome back to Deep Sleep Seas. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Perhaps the day has been long, filled with tasks and thoughts that need quieting now. Or maybe you're simply someone who finds comfort in drifting through deep mysteries as sleep approaches, letting the wonders of the ocean carry you gently away from the day's concerns. Let your shoulders drop just a little. Feel your breathing slow, natural, and easy, as if you're floating weightless in calm water. Tonight's journey takes us to a place few will ever see, a realm where sunlight has never reached, and where the pressures of the surface world transform into something entirely different. Did you know that in the deepest parts of the ocean, some creatures create their own light, glowing softly like stars in an underwater night sky? Tonight we're sinking gently into the abyssal zone, that vast expanse of ocean floor that lies thousands of meters below the surface. In this quiet journey, you'll hear about creatures so beautifully adapted to darkness and pressure that they seem to belong to another world entirely. From anglerfish with their glowing lures to the gardens of life that bloom around fallen whales, from transparent squid to bacteria that build entire ecosystems in total blackness. Let's drift together into this gentle, mysterious realm where life finds extraordinary ways to persist. But before we jump in, if you enjoy learning about our oceans, you're welcome to let us know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far our stories reach. And if these quiet ocean journeys help you unwind, you're always welcome to subscribe so you can drift off with us whenever you need. Now, let your body grow a little heavier as we begin. Imagine yourself at the surface of the ocean on a calm day. The water stretches endlessly in all directions, gentle swells rising and falling like slow breaths. Sunlight dances across the surface, penetrating down through clear blue water, illuminating schools of fish and forests of kelp swaying in the current. This is the world we know, the ocean of coral reefs and dolphins, of tide pools and coastal waves. But beneath this familiar realm lies something vastly different. A world that occupies more space on Earth than all our continents combined, yet remains largely unknown to us. As you sink deeper, the light begins to fade. First, the warm reds disappear from the spectrum, absorbed by the water above. Then the oranges and yellows vanish, leaving only blues and greens, deeper still, and even these colors fade to a dim twilight. By the time you've descended 200 meters, you're entering what scientists call the twilight zone, where only the faintest traces of sunlight can reach. The water here holds a deep blue darkness, a transitional space between the lit world above and the perpetual night below. But we're going deeper still, down past 1,000 meters, where the last photons of sunlight surrender entirely, down through the midnight zone, where the water turns to absolute blackness, and finally, somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 meters below the surface, we reach our destination, the abyssal zone, from the Greek word meaning bottomless. The abyssal zone represents one of Earth's largest habitats, covering more than half of the planet's surface. Imagine every landmass on Earth, every forest and desert, every mountain range and prairie, all combined together. The abyssal zone is larger. It's a vast, flat plain of sediment stretching across the ocean floor, broken occasionally by underwater mountains called seamounts, volcanic ridges where new crust is born, and deep trenches that plunge even further into the Earth's embrace. The conditions here would seem utterly hostile to life. The temperature hovers just above freezing, typically between 2 and 3 degrees Celsius, remaining remarkably constant year-round. The water is absolutely still, far removed from the surface storms that churn the upper ocean. No waves reach down here, no currents to speak of in most places, just an ancient quietness that has persisted for millions of years. And then there's the pressure. At the abyssal zone, the weight of all the water above creates a pressure so intense it's measured in hundreds of atmospheres. At 4,000 meters, the pressure reaches about 400 times what we experience at sea level. To put this in perspective, this is roughly equivalent to having an elephant standing on every square inch of your body. Submarines built to withstand this pressure must have walls of reinforced steel inches thick. Any air-filled space would be crushed instantly. Yet life thrives here. Against all seeming odds, the abyssal zone teems with living things, from microscopic bacteria to fish the length of your arm, from delicate glass sponges to crabs with legs spanning several feet. These creatures have evolved over millions of years to not just survive but to flourish in conditions that would destroy most surface-dwelling organisms in moments. The organisms here don't fight against the pressure, because the pressure exists both outside and inside their bodies. Their cells are filled with the same high-pressure water that surrounds them, achieving a perfect equilibrium. They have no air bladders to compress, no gas-filled spaces to collapse. Their proteins and cell membranes have evolved to function optimally under these extreme pressures, actually requiring them to maintain their shape and function properly. If you brought an abyssal creature to the surface, it would be the decrease in pressure that would harm it, causing its specially adapted biochemistry to fail. The water here is ancient, having left the surface hundreds or even thousands of years ago in the polar regions where cold, dense water sinks and begins its slow journey through the deep ocean. This water carries oxygen dissolved from the surface, enough to sustain life, though the levels are far lower than in the sunlit zones above. As it travels through the abyss, organisms consume this oxygen, but so slowly that it remains available, a testament to the low population density and slow metabolic rates of deep-sea life. The seafloor itself tells stories written in sediment. In most places, the abyssal plain is covered in a fine ooze made up of the microscopic remains of plankton that lived and died in the surface waters far above. Their tiny shells and skeletons drift down through the water column like snow, accumulating over millions of years into layers sometimes hundreds of meters thick. This sediment is so fine it's almost like powder, soft and easily disturbed. When the occasional current does flow, or when a creature moves across the bottom, it kicks up clouds of this ancient dust that can take hours to settle again. In deeper parts, beyond 6,000 meters, even these calcium shells dissolve under the pressure and the slightly acidic conditions, leaving behind only the finest clay and silica from the remains of diatoms and radiolarians. The color of the seafloor varies from region to region, from reddish-brown clays rich in iron to pale tan sediments, each telling a different story about the chemistry of the water and the life that exists far above. But the abyssal zone is not uniformly flat. Volcanic activity creates seamounts, underwater mountains that rise thousands of meters from the seafloor, sometimes nearly reaching the surface. These seamounts alter water flow patterns, creating areas of enhanced currents that can bring more nutrients and support denser populations of life. Mid-ocean ridges, vast underwater mountain chains where tectonic plates pull apart, run through all the ocean basins like the seams on a baseball. Here magma wells up from deep within the earth, creating new oceanic crust and sometimes giving birth to hydrothermal vents where superheated, mineral-rich water pours into the cold abyss. And then there are the trenches, places where one tectonic plate slides beneath another, creating wounds in the ocean floor that plunge to depths even greater than the abyssal zone. The Hadal Zone, as these ultra-deep regions are called, represents the absolute deepest parts of the ocean, reaching down nearly 11,000 meters in places like the Mariana Trench. These are realms where the pressure becomes so extreme that even specially designed equipment struggles to function, where the conditions push the very limits of what we understand about life's possibilities. The abyssal zone exists in perpetual darkness, a blackness so complete, it's difficult for those of us accustomed to artificial light to truly comprehend. There is no day or night here, no seasons, no change in light levels at all. The sun, moon, and stars might as well not exist. Time is marked not by the rotation of the Earth or its orbit around the sun, but by the slow drift of currents, the gradual accumulation of sediment, and the patient cycles of life and death that unfold over timescales measured in years and decades rather than days. In this darkness, vision as we understand it becomes nearly useless for most purposes. There's simply nothing to see, no ambient light to reflect off objects and carry their shapes and colors to an observer's eyes. And yet in this blackness, light appears. Not sunlight, but light created by living things themselves, a phenomenon we call bioluminescence. In the abyssal zone, an estimated 76% of all animals that drift through the water column produce their own light in some form. Down here, the ability to create light has become not an oddity, but the norm, a fundamental adaptation as essential as the ability to swim or to extract oxygen from water. This is a world that operates by rules entirely different from those on the surface. It's a realm of scarcity, where food is precious and encounters with other creatures are rare. It's a place of remarkable stillness, yet also of sudden explosive activity when opportunities arise. It's an environment that seems alien, yet it's part of our own planet, existing in the same oceans where we swim and surf and sail. The abyssal zone is proof that Earth still holds vast mysteries, that there are frontiers still unexplored despite all our technology and knowledge. And in this strange, dark, pressurized world, life has found ways not just to exist, but to create beauty, to develop strategies of breathtaking complexity, to evolve forms and functions that challenge our assumptions about what's possible. The creatures of the abyss are not merely survivors, they are masterpieces of adaptation, each one a solution to the puzzle of how to thrive where conditions seem impossible. As we explore this realm together, we'll meet some of these remarkable beings, each with their own story of survival written in their very bodies, in their behaviors, and in their intricate relationships with each other and their environment. The darkness waits below, patient and ancient. Let's descend together and discover what lives within it. In the absolute blackness of the abyssal zone, where no ray of sunlight has penetrated for hundreds of millions of years, something remarkable happens. Lights appear. Not many at first, just occasional flickers and glows, like distant stars appearing as twilight deepens into night. But as your eyes adjust, you begin to see them everywhere. Pulses of blue-green light, sudden flashes of brilliance, steady glows drifting through the darkness like luminous ghosts. This is bioluminescence, the production of light by living organisms, and in the deep sea, it has become one of evolution's most successful innovations. The chemistry behind bioluminescence is elegantly simple in principle, though beautifully complex in its details. At its heart lies a molecule called luciferin, a compound that exists in many variations across different species, but always serves the same basic function. When luciferin combines with oxygen in the presence of an enzyme called luciferins, it undergoes a chemical reaction that releases energy. In most chemical reactions, this energy would be lost as heat, but in bioluminescence, the energy is released as light, making it what scientists call a cold light reaction. Nearly 100% of the energy produced becomes light rather than heat, making bioluminescence one of the most efficient light-producing processes known to science, far more efficient than any light bulb or LED we've created. Different species have evolved different versions of both luciferin and luciferase, resulting in lights of different colors, intensities, and durations. The vast majority of bioluminescent organisms in the deep sea produce blue or blue-green light, and for good reason. Water absorbs light of different colors at different rates. Reds and oranges are absorbed quickly, disappearing within the first few meters of depth. Blues and greens penetrate much further through water before being absorbed. In the deep sea, where every photon counts, producing blue-green light makes perfect sense because it's the color that will travel the furthest and be most visible to other creatures. Some animals produce their bioluminescence internally, manufacturing both the luciferin and luciferase in their own tissues. Others have formed partnerships with bacteria that produce light for them. These symbiotic bacteria live in special light organs in the animal's body, receiving nutrients and protection in exchange for their luminous services. The Hawaiian bobtail squid, though not a deep-sea dweller, provides one of the best-studied examples of this partnership. Within hours of hatching, the young squid's light organ becomes colonized by bioluminescent bacteria. The squid then carefully tends this bacterial garden throughout its life, controlling the light output by adjusting blood flow to the organ or covering it with specialized tissues. In the abyssal zone, bioluminescence serves many purposes, and understanding these uses helps us understand how life organizes itself in the darkness. Perhaps the most straightforward use is in hunting. Many predators use light to attract prey, a strategy perfected by one of the deep sea's most iconic residents, which we'll explore in depth soon. But the principle is simple. In a dark world, a small glowing object looks like food to many creatures. Small planktonic animals are drawn to light, and anything that eats those animals can use this attraction to lure a meal within reach. The counter-illumination strategy represents a more subtle use of bioluminescence. Many fish and squid have light-producing organs, called photophores, arranged along their bellies. These photophores produce a soft, diffuse glow that matches the faint light filtering down from above in the twilight and upper midnight zones. Viewed from below, a fish with active photophores blends perfectly into the dim, downwelling light, becoming essentially invisible to predators hunting from beneath. This camouflage by matching background light is so effective that it has evolved independently in numerous different groups of deep-sea animals. Defense provides another crucial function for bioluminescence. When attacked, some animals release clouds of bioluminescent chemicals, creating a glowing distraction that confuses predators while the animal escapes into the darkness. Deep-sea shrimp are masters of this technique, ejecting clouds of bioluminescent vomit when threatened. The predator, temporarily blinded by the bright light in the darkness, loses track of its prey. Some species take this a step further, their bioluminescent displays actually attracting other larger predators to the scene. The original prey escapes while its attacker becomes potential prey itself. One species of jellyfish, dubbed the alarm jellyfish, produces brilliant red flashes when disturbed, thought to function like an underwater burglar alarm, summoning help by attracting the attention of anything nearby. Perhaps the most challenging use of bioluminescence in the abyss is communication, particularly for reproduction. Finding a mate in the vast darkness of the deep sea is extraordinarily difficult. The ocean's volume is immense, and the population density is low. How does one organism find another of its own species in such vastness? Many deep-sea creatures use species-specific light patterns to signal their presence and identity. Each species has its own arrangement of photophores, its own rhythm of flashes, its own color or intensity of light. It's like a visual language, allowing individuals to identify others of their kind even at a distance in the darkness. Some fish use these light patterns in elaborate courtship displays. Males and females may have different patterns, allowing each to identify not just their species but the sex of a distant individual. During mating season, certain deep-sea fish gather in areas where their bioluminescent courtship displays create what amounts to an underwater light show, though one that happens in secret, far from human eyes, illuminating only tiny volumes of water in the vast dark ocean. The physical structures that produce bioluminescence are as varied as their functions. Photophores, the specialized light-producing organs, range from simple groups of light-producing cells to complex structures rivaling the sophistication of eyes. Some photophores include lenses to focus the light, reflectors to direct it, colored filters to modify it, and even shutters or covers to control when it's visible. These organs can be scattered across an animal's body or concentrated in specific locations, each placement serving a particular purpose in the creature's life. In some species, the photophores are so numerous and so precisely controlled that the animal can create complex light patterns, sequential flashes that might convey information or simply serve to dazzle and confuse predators. Scientists studying bioluminescence have documented instances of animals creating elaborate light shows that we're still trying to fully understand, patterns that might represent a form of communication as complex as birdsong or whale calls, but expressed in pulses of light rather than sound. The evolution of bioluminescence has occurred independently at least 40 separate times across the tree of life, and possibly many more times than that. This convergent evolution, where unrelated organisms develop similar adaptations in response to similar environmental pressures, suggests that in the deep sea the ability to produce light confers such advantages that natural selection has favored it again and again. Among just the ray-finned fishes, bioluminescence has evolved independently at least 27 times, with different groups developing their own unique biochemical pathways to achieve the same glowing result. The prevalence of bioluminescence in the deep sea has led some scientists to propose that it may be the most common form of communication on Earth. After all, the deep ocean represents the largest habitat on the planet by volume, and the majority of animals in that habitat use light to communicate. Every day and night, in the darkness beneath the waves, countless billions of bioluminescent signals flash and glow, carrying information, attracting prey, warning off predators, and bringing mates together. It's a silent conversation conducted in light, invisible to us on the surface, but fundamental to how life organizes itself in the largest ecosystem on Earth. The colors produced by bioluminescence tell their own stories. While most deep-sea animals produce blue-green light, some species have evolved the ability to produce red light, and this gives them a special advantage. Most deep-sea animals cannot see red light. Their visual pigments are tuned to detect blue and green wavelengths, the colors that occur naturally in the deep sea. But a few species, particularly some dragonfishes, can both produce and see red light. This gives them a private channel of communication, invisible to most other creatures. a red searchlight that allows them to see their prey without alerting it to danger, or to signal to others of their kind without advertising their presence to predators. Understanding bioluminescence has practical applications beyond simply satisfying our curiosity about the deep sea. The same proteins that allow jellyfish and bacteria to glow have become invaluable tools in medical and biological research. Green fluorescent protein, originally isolated from a bioluminescent jellyfish, is now used to track cell division, visualize cancer spread, and study neural activity. The scientists who first isolated and described this protein were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, recognizing how a molecule evolved in the darkness of the ocean could illuminate our understanding of life processes at the cellular level. As we drift through this dark realm, imagine the lights you might see. A small fish passes by, its belly outlined in gentle blue luminescence. In the distance, something flashes 3 times in rapid succession, then goes dark again. A jellyfish pulses past, each pulse sending waves of light rippling through its transparent body. Below, on the seafloor, tiny points of light mark the presence of creatures moving through the sediment. Above, occasional flashes suggest animals feeding or fleeing in the water column. This is a world not of darkness, but of scattered, purposeful lights. Each glow represents a story, a creature trying to survive, to find food, to reproduce, to avoid becoming food itself. In the absence of sunlight, life has created its own illumination, turning the abyss into a realm of gentle, mysterious lights drifting through an endless night. It's a light show that has been performing for hundreds of millions of years, since long before humans existed to witness it, and one that will likely continue long after we're gone, a testament to life's creativity and persistence in the face of extreme challenges. Of all the creatures that inhabit the abyssal zone, few have captured the human imagination quite like the anglerfish. With their grotesque appearance, their glowing lures, and their bizarre reproductive strategies, anglerfishes represent some of the most extreme adaptations to deep-sea life. They are masters of deception, patient hunters in a realm where food is scarce and encounters with prey are rare, and they've evolved solutions to the challenges of the abyss that seem almost too strange to be real. The anglerfish family is diverse, containing over 200 species, but when most people picture an anglerfish, they're thinking of the deep-sea serracioid anglerfish, particularly species like Melanocetus johnson, sometimes called the Black Sea Devil. This is the archetypal deep-sea anglerfish, with its round, basketball-shaped body, cavernous mouth filled with long, needle-sharp teeth angled inward, and most distinctively, a long, modified spine extending from the top of its head like a fishing rod, complete with a glowing lure at its tip. The body of a deep-sea anglerfish appears almost comically out of proportion. The mouth is enormous relative to body size, sometimes representing nearly half the animal's length. This massive mouth is necessary because the anglerfish's hunting strategy involves swallowing prey whole, and in the food-poor environment of the abyss, an anglerfish cannot afford to be choosy about meal sizes. The jaws and stomach can both expand to truly remarkable degrees, with some anglerfish documented to have swallowed prey twice their own length and 10 times their own weight. The teeth, long and sharp, are angled backward into the mouth. Once prey passes these teeth, escape becomes nearly impossible. They don't need to be strong enough to crush or tear prey. They just need to hold it in place while the anglerfish's expandable stomach does the rest. The bones of an anglerfish are thin and somewhat flexible, adapted to allow the extreme distension necessary to accommodate such large meals. It's an adaptation born of necessity. In an environment where your next meal might not come for days or weeks, you need to be able to take full advantage when food finally presents itself. But the most remarkable feature of the anglerfish is its lure, called an esker, dangling at the end of a modified dorsal spine called the elysium. This is the anglerfish's fishing rod, a marvel of evolutionary innovation. In deep-sea species, the esker contains bioluminescent bacteria that produce a steady glow. The anglerfish cannot produce this light itself. Instead, it maintains a culture of symbiotic bacteria in the esker, providing them with nutrients through a rich blood supply to the lure, while the bacteria provide light in return. The light from the esker is surprisingly bright in the absolute darkness of the abyss, visible from a considerable distance. But what makes it particularly effective is how the anglerfish uses it. The anglerfish doesn't swim actively in search of prey. That would expend far too much energy in an environment where energy is precious. Instead, it hangs motionless in the water or rests on the seafloor, invisible in the darkness, except for its glowing lure. It waves the lure back and forth with small, precise movements of the Elysium, making it move in ways that might resemble a small fish or a piece of drifting bioluminescent plankton. Small fish and invertebrates, drawn to what they perceive as food, or perhaps simply curious about the light source, approach the lure. The anglerfish remains perfectly still, conserving energy, waiting with infinite patience. Only when the prey comes within striking distance does the anglerfish move, and when it does, it moves with shocking speed. In a burst of motion that can be over in a fraction of a second, the anglerfish lunges forward, opening its massive jaws and creating a powerful suction that pulls the prey into its mouth. The inward angled teeth close around the victim, and the meal is secured. The entire attack, from the first movement to the closing of the jaws, might take less than 6 milliseconds, faster than most prey can possibly react. The anglerfish's skin is typically dark brown to black, a coloration that serves multiple purposes. In the general darkness of the abyss, being black makes you nearly invisible. But there's another more subtle advantage. The skin is specially adapted to absorb light rather than reflect it. This is crucial for a hunter that uses bioluminescence. If the anglerfish's skin reflected the blue light from its own lure or from nearby bioluminescent organisms, it would become visible to potential prey. By absorbing all light that strikes it, the anglerfish remains invisible except for its lure, a single bright point in the darkness with no apparent source. Deep-sea anglerfish are not strong swimmers. Their round bodies and small fins make them poor at sustained swimming, and that's perfectly fine for their lifestyle. They drift slowly through the water or rest on the bottom, occasionally moving to a new location if the hunting isn't productive, but mostly relying on patience rather than active pursuit. This sedentary lifestyle is well suited to an environment where food is scarce and energy conservation is essential. An anglerfish might go weeks between meals, surviving on the energy from a single large catch. But perhaps the most bizarre aspect of anglerfish biology is their reproductive strategy, particularly in deep-sea species. There's an extreme sexual dimorphism in these fish, meaning the males and females are dramatically different from each other. The anglerfish we've been describing, with its lure and massive jaws and rounded body, is actually the female. The male anglerfish is a completely different creature, typically only a few centimeters long, about the size of your finger, while females can reach lengths of up to 12 centimeters or more. Male anglerfish have large eyes relative to their body size and a well-developed sense of smell, but they lack the lure entirely and have much smaller jaws. They have no need to hunt because they have a completely different purpose in life. A male anglerfish's entire existence is oriented toward a single goal, finding a female. When a male locates a female, likely by following pheromones she releases into the water, he bites onto her body. In some species, this is where the story takes an even stranger turn. In certain anglerfish species, the bite is not temporary. The male's mouth fuses with the female's skin, and over time, their circulatory systems join. The male becomes essentially a permanent parasite, no longer needing to hunt or swim or do anything except produce sperm when needed. He receives all his nutrients from the female's bloodstream, and in exchange, she has a guaranteed source of sperm whenever she's ready to reproduce. In some cases, multiple males attach to a single female, creating what amounts to a swimming colony. This extreme adaptation is a solution to one of the abyss's greatest challenges: how to find a mate in the vast dark ocean. Population densities are extremely low in the deep sea. An anglerfish might go its entire life without encountering another member of its species. For males, once they find a female, it makes evolutionary sense never to let her go. For females, having a permanently attached mate means they don't have to waste energy searching for males when they're ready to reproduce. However, not all anglerfish species exhibit this parasitic mating behavior. In some species, including the black sea devil, the male bites the female only temporarily during mating, then releases and goes on to search for other females. The variety of mating strategies across different anglerfish species suggests that evolution has experimented with multiple solutions to the problem of reproduction in the abyss. Anglerfish reproduce by external fertilization. The female releases eggs into the water in a gelatinous sheet or ribbon that can be several meters long, containing hundreds of thousands of individual eggs. The male releases sperm to fertilize these eggs, and then the parent's role is done. The eggs and larvae drift in the ocean currents, developing in the upper layers of the ocean where food is more abundant. As they grow, they gradually descend to deeper waters, finally settling into the abyssal zone as adults. This life cycle, with larvae developing in food-rich surface waters and adults living in the food-poor depths, is common among many deep-sea species. It allows the young to grow quickly in an environment where food is plentiful before moving to the depths where competition is lower and predator pressure is reduced. The diversity within the anglerfish order is remarkable. While deep-sea species have become the most famous, there are also anglerfish that live in shallower waters, including the frogfishes of coral reefs and the goosefishes of temperate ocean floors. Each has adapted the basic anglerfish body plan to their particular environment. Frogfish, for instance, are masters of camouflage, able to change color and texture to match coral, sponges, or algae. Their lures resemble small worms or shrimp, precisely mimicking potential prey items to lure hungry fish within reach. Some deep-sea anglerfish species have developed variations on the lure that suggest they've specialized for particular types of prey. The shape, size, and motion of the lure can vary considerably between species, presumably attracting different organisms. Some have elaborate branching structures, others have simple bulbs. The exact mechanisms by which different lure types attract different prey remain poorly understood, part of the vast amount we still have to learn about life in the abyss. Recent research has revealed that anglerfish have continued to evolve and diversify even in the seemingly monotonous environment of the deep sea. Contrary to earlier assumptions that the abyssal zone's uniform conditions would limit evolutionary innovation, anglerfish have developed a surprising variety of body shapes and hunting strategies. Some species are elongated rather than round, with jaw structures resembling traps, earning them names like wolf trap anglerfish. This diversity suggests that even in the deep sea there are different ecological niches to fill, different strategies for success. The anglerfish's success in the abyss is a testament to the power of specialization. They've given up speed, agility, and active hunting in favor of patience, energy efficiency, and deception. In a resource-poor environment, these trade-offs make perfect sense. Why waste energy chasing prey that might escape when you can simply wait for prey to come to you, drawn by a light they cannot resist? The anglerfish has turned the challenges of the abyss into advantages, using darkness as cover and scarcity as an opportunity to specialize in an extremely patient hunting strategy that works perfectly in this slow, cold, dark realm. In the abyssal zone, one of the most persistent questions facing every living thing is the same question that confronts all life everywhere: what is there to eat? But in the abyss, this question takes on a particular urgency. There are no plants here because there is no light for photosynthesis. There are no kelp forests, no phytoplankton, no primary producers of any kind creating food from sunlight and nutrients. The entire ecosystem must rely on food produced elsewhere, making the abyssal zone what ecologists call a heterotrophic environment, one that depends entirely on organic matter produced in other places. The primary source of food for the abyss is marine snow, and despite its pleasant name, it's not something you'd want to ski on. Marine snow consists of tiny particles drifting down from the surface waters above, dead plankton, fecal pellets from animals, discarded mucus feeding structures, molted exoskeletons, and fragments of larger organisms. These particles are typically only a few millimeters in size, and they fall through the water column incredibly slowly, taking weeks or even months to travel from the surface to the abyssal seafloor. During this long descent, much of the marine snow is consumed by organisms in the upper zones of the ocean. By the time particles reach the abyss, they've been picked over, partially decomposed, and significantly reduced in nutritional value. What finally settles on the abyssal seafloor is often the least palatable remnants, the parts that nothing else wanted to eat. It's been estimated that only about 1 to 2% of the organic matter produced at the surface eventually reaches the abyssal zone. The seafloor of the abyss is, in terms of food availability, one of the most impoverished environments on Earth. Organisms living in the abyss have evolved numerous strategies to survive on this meager ration. Many have extremely slow metabolic rates, burning energy at a fraction of the pace of their surface-dwelling relatives. Slow metabolism means slow growth and slow reproduction. but it also means an animal can survive for long periods on very little food. Some abyssal fish grow so slowly that it takes them decades to reach maturity. Their lives are extended, patient affairs, marked by long periods of inactivity between occasional meals. The seafloor itself becomes a buffet, albeit a sparse one. Deposit feeders, animals that eat sediment and extract whatever organic material it contains, are common in the abyss. Sea cucumbers, certain worms and various small crustaceans make their living this way, processing vast quantities of seafloor sediment to extract tiny amounts of nutrition. Other organisms are suspension feeders, straining particles from the water just above the bottom, where the constant gentle rain of marine snow is slightly more concentrated than in the water column above. But occasionally something extraordinary happens. A large animal dies in the surface waters, and its body sinks to the seafloor. If the animal is big enough, a whale for instance, it represents a sudden influx of organic matter equivalent to hundreds or thousands of years of normal marine snow accumulation, all arriving at once in a single location. This phenomenon is called a whale fall, and it creates one of the most remarkable ecosystems in the entire ocean. When a whale dies, its carcass typically floats for a few days as decomposition gases build up inside the body. Eventually, these gases escape or are consumed by bacteria, and the massive body begins to sink. A large whale can weigh 40 tons or more, and it descends relatively quickly once it starts sinking, reaching the abyssal seafloor in a matter of hours or a few days. When it lands, it creates an impact in the soft sediment, settling into the ooze and becoming a feature of the landscape that will persist for decades. The transformation of a whale carcass into a thriving ecosystem happens in stages that scientists have categorized and studied. The first stage, called the mobile scavenger stage, begins almost immediately. Sharks, large fish, and hagfish are drawn to the carcass, attracted perhaps by chemicals released into the water, or simply by encountering it while scavenging across the seafloor. These animals tear into the soft tissues, consuming the nutrient-rich flesh. A typical 40-ton whale carcass can support hundreds or even thousands of these scavengers, all feeding simultaneously. The carcass might be stripped of most of its soft tissue in just a few months, an incredibly rapid consumption by deep-sea standards. What's left after the mobile scavengers have finished is a skeleton still rich in organic matter and nutrients. This initiates the second stage, the enrichment opportunist stage. The bones and the sediment immediately surrounding the carcass are enriched with organic material, oils that have seeped out of the bones, and decomposing tissue fragments. This enriched area attracts a different community of organisms, polychaete worms, crustaceans, mollusks, and other invertebrates that specialize in consuming decomposing organic matter. This stage can last for several years, with the area around the whale skeleton supporting a much denser and more diverse community than the surrounding seafloor. The third stage is perhaps the most remarkable, the sulfophilic stage. Whale bones are not just calcium. They're also rich in lipids, fats that were stored in the bone matrix during the whale's life. Specialized bacteria can break down these lipids, but to do so they use sulfate from the seawater rather than oxygen. This process, called anaerobic sulfate reduction, produces hydrogen sulfide as a byproduct. The same chemical that gives rotten eggs their smell becomes the foundation of an entirely new ecosystem. Hydrogen sulfide is toxic to most animals, but certain bacteria can use it as an energy source through a process called chemosynthesis. These chemosynthetic bacteria form thick mats on the whale bones, white or yellowish bacterial carpets covering the skeleton. They're primary producers, creating organic matter from inorganic chemicals, but without using sunlight. In this way, they're similar to the bacteria that live around hydrothermal vents, though using a different chemical energy source. These bacterial mats attract a specialized community of animals that can tolerate or even require the hydrogen sulfide-rich environment. Certain mussels, clams, and snails have evolved symbiotic relationships with chemosynthetic bacteria living in their tissues, similar to the communities found at hydrothermal vents and cold seeps. The most famous of these whale fall specialists is probably Osedax, the bone-eating worm. Osedax worms are polychaetes that have lost their mouths and guts. Instead, they have root-like structures that penetrate deep into whale bones, and bacteria living inside these roots digest the bone matrix, providing nutrients to the worm. Different species of Osedax specialize in different types of bones, and a single whale skeleton can host multiple species. The sulfilic stage can last for 50 to 100 years, depending on the size of the whale and environmental conditions. During this time, the whale skeleton supports a diverse community that can include dozens of species, many of which are found nowhere else. The whale fall becomes an island of life in the otherwise food-poor abyssal plain, a hotspot of biodiversity supported by the chemical energy stored in whale bones. Eventually, even the lipids in the bones are exhausted. This marks the transition to the fourth and final stage, the reef stage. The whale skeleton, now stripped of its organic content, remains as a hard substrate on the seafloor, a rare surface in an environment dominated by soft sediment. Suspension feeders, animals that strain food particles from the water, colonize the bones. Sponges, corals, and various other organisms turn the skeleton into a small reef, continuing to support a distinct community for years or decades more until the bones themselves finally break down. A single whale fall can support an estimated 12,000 to 13,000 individual organisms representing over 40 species. This is a stark contrast to the surrounding abyssal plain, where you might find only a handful of organisms per square meter. The whale fall creates an oasis in the desert, a concentration of life supported by the remains of a single animal. But whale falls do more than just provide food. They may serve as stepping stones for the dispersal of species that live at chemosynthetic habitats, hydrothermal vents and cold seeps. Other environments where chemosynthetic bacteria form the base of the food web are scattered across the ocean floor, often separated by hundreds or thousands of kilometers. How do species specialized for these habitats move from one to another across the barren expanses in between? Whale falls may provide the answer. A whale fall creates a temporary chemosynthetic habitat that can persist for decades. Species from vents or seeps can colonize whale falls, and their larvae can then drift to the next vent, seep, or whale fall, island hopping across the abyss. Genetic studies have supported this hypothesis, showing that some species found at whale falls are closely related to species at vents and seeps, and that whale falls likely played a role in their evolutionary history and ongoing dispersal. In this way, whales contribute to deep-sea biodiversity not just through the nutrients in their bones but through creating habitats that connect otherwise isolated ecosystems. The importance of whale falls to abyssal ecosystems raises interesting questions about how changes in whale populations might affect the deep sea. During the industrial whaling era of the 19th and 20th centuries, many whale species were hunted nearly to extinction. Fewer whales in the ocean means fewer whale falls on the seafloor. Has this reduction affected deep-sea communities? Are there species that depend on whale falls that might have declined as whale populations fell? We don't yet know, but it's a reminder that changes at the surface can have profound effects in the deepest parts of the ocean, even when those effects aren't immediately obvious. In recent years, scientists have also documented falls of other large marine animals, a curious phenomenon they're calling fish falls, seal falls, and even shark falls. While none of these provide the same massive input of organic matter as a whale fall, they still create localized enrichment events that attract scavengers and enrich the surrounding sediment. Even large pieces of wood that sink to the seafloor can create wood falls, supporting communities of wood-boring bivalves and bacteria. The deep ocean depends on the surface for its food, either through the slow, constant rain of marine snow, or through the occasional bonanza of a large carcass falling from above. This connection between surface and depth means that the abyssal ecosystem is vulnerable to changes at the surface. Climate change that affects primary productivity in surface waters will eventually affect food availability in the abyss. Plastic pollution that accumulates at the surface eventually sinks, becoming incorporated into marine snow and potentially affecting deep-sea organisms. The ocean is connected vertically as well as horizontally, and the deepest parts are intimately linked to the shallowest, bound together by the falling snow of organic particles and the occasional transformative gift of a large carcass descending into the depths. Life in the abyssal zone demands adaptations not just to darkness and scarcity, but to pressure. The crushing weight of thousands of meters of water pressing in from all sides. At 4,000 meters depth, the pressure reaches approximately 400 atmospheres, or about 6,000 pounds per square inch. To put this in perspective, if you could somehow transport yourself to this depth unprotected, the pressure would compress your body to a fraction of its normal size almost instantly. Yet organisms thrive there. seemingly unbothered by pressures that would destroy most surface life. How do they do it? The answer lies in understanding what pressure actually affects and what it doesn't. Pressure primarily affects gas-filled spaces, because gases are highly compressible. Bring a balloon filled with air down to the abyssal zone, and it would shrink to a tiny fraction of its original size as the gas inside is compressed. This is why submarines need incredibly strong hulls with no air-filled compartments that could collapse. But abyssal organisms don't have gas-filled spaces. They have no swim bladders filled with air, no lungs holding atmospheric gas, no air pockets in their tissues. Instead, their bodies are filled with water, and water is nearly incompressible. The water inside their cells is at the same pressure as the water outside, so there's no pressure gradient trying to crush them. In this sense, abyssal organisms don't really experience pressure the way we think about it. They exist in equilibrium with their environment, the internal and external pressures balanced perfectly. However, pressure does affect some aspects of biology, even when there's no gas involved. Pressure influences how proteins fold, how cell membranes function, and how chemical reactions proceed. Under high pressure, proteins that would work perfectly at the surface can become distorted, losing their proper shape and therefore their function. Cell membranes can become too rigid, interfering with the transport of materials in and out of cells. Chemical reactions that depend on slight changes in molecular volume can be pushed in one direction or another. Abyssal organisms have evolved proteins and membranes specifically adapted to high pressure. Their proteins are typically more flexible than those of surface organisms, with amino acid sequences that allow them to maintain proper folding even under extreme pressure. Their cell membranes have different lipid compositions, with more unsaturated fats that remain fluid even under pressure and at cold temperatures. Some deep-sea organisms produce special molecules called osmolytes that help stabilize proteins under pressure, acting like molecular supports to keep proteins properly shaped. Interestingly, many of these adaptations are so specialized that they work only at high pressure. If you bring a deep-sea fish to the surface, it often doesn't survive, not because the decrease in pressure crushes it, but because its proteins and membranes stop working properly at low pressure. The adaptations that allow it to thrive in the abyss become liabilities at the surface. It's a reminder that evolution doesn't create organisms that can thrive everywhere. It creates organisms exquisitely adapted to specific environments. Temperature presents another challenge in the abyss. The water here is just above freezing, typically between 2 and 3 degrees Celsius. At these temperatures, most biochemical reactions slow down dramatically. Enzymes work more slowly, nerve signals propagate more sluggishly, and muscles contract with less force. For warm-blooded animals like mammals and birds, maintaining body temperature in such cold water requires enormous amounts of energy, which is one reason why warm-blooded animals are rare in the deep sea. The few that do visit, like sperm whales and elephant seals, are heavily insulated and must return to the surface regularly. Cold-blooded organisms, whose body temperatures match their environment, have evolved different solutions. Many produce antifreeze proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming in their tissues, even at temperatures below the normal freezing point of water. These proteins bind to small ice crystals that do form, preventing them from growing large enough to damage cells. Similar antifreeze proteins have evolved independently in Antarctic fish, demonstrating again that convergent evolution often finds similar solutions to similar problems. The cold temperatures in the abyss do have some advantages. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water, so even though oxygen is consumed by organisms and not replenished by photosynthesis, there's often enough available to sustain life. The cold also slows decomposition, which is why whale falls can persist for decades, and why organic matter, once it reaches the abyssal seafloor, remains relatively available as a food source. Many abyssal organisms have remarkably slow metabolic rates, burning energy at a tiny fraction of the rate of their warm water or surface relatives. This allows them to survive on minimal food, but it also means everything about their lives proceeds slowly. Growth is slow, reproduction is slow, even movement is often slow. Many deep-sea fish drift more than swim, expending as little energy as possible on locomotion. They conserve their energy for the rare moments when quick action is necessary, like capturing prey or escaping from a predator. The body composition of abyssal creatures reflects these adaptations. Many have reduced skeletons, with bones that are less dense and calcified than those of surface fish. Heavy, strong bones aren't necessary in an environment with no gravity to fight against. You're neutrally buoyant in water regardless of your skeleton's composition. By reducing skeletal mass, these fish save energy that would be needed to build and maintain dense bones. Some have watery, gelatinous flesh with very little muscle tissue, again reducing their energy needs. Eyes present an interesting challenge in the abyss. In complete darkness, one might expect eyes to be useless, and indeed some abyssal organisms have lost their eyes entirely or have reduced them to mere light-sensitive spots. But many abyssal fish have actually evolved larger eyes than their shallow water relatives. These enormous eyes, sometimes making up a substantial fraction of the fish's head, are specialized for detecting the faintest bioluminescent flashes in the darkness. The retinas of these eyes are packed with rod cells, light-sensitive cells that work in dim conditions, while color-detecting cone cells are absent. There's no need to see color in a world where the only light is the blue-green glow of bioluminescence. Some abyssal fish have developed tubular eyes, a strange adaptation where the eyes are shaped like cylinders pointing upward. These tubular eyes give exceptional light-gathering ability in one direction, allowing the fish to spot prey or predators silhouetted against the faint light from above. The trade-off is a very narrow field of view, but in the resource-poor abyss, specialization often trumps versatility. The sense of smell becomes particularly important in the darkness. Many abyssal organisms have highly developed olfactory systems, able to detect incredibly small concentrations of chemicals in the water. Smell can lead a predator to prey, help a scavenger locate a distant food fall, or allow males and females to find each other for reproduction across vast distances. The water in the abyss moves slowly, so a trail of chemical cues can persist for long periods, creating invisible highways of scent through the darkness. Some organisms have evolved extraordinary senses we barely understand. Certain fish can detect minute electrical fields generated by the muscle contractions of other animals. Others have lateral line systems so sensitive they can detect the slightest water movements from considerable distances. In a world where vision is limited and sound travels differently than at the surface, these alternative senses become primary ways of perceiving the environment. The challenges of the abyss have driven the evolution of some truly remarkable adaptations, each one a solution to the specific problems posed by life in extreme pressure, cold, and darkness. These adaptations remind us that life is extraordinarily creative, finding ways to thrive in every environment Earth offers, no matter how extreme it seems from our surface-dwelling perspective. The abyss isn't hostile to life, it's simply different, and life has had millions of years to adapt to its particular conditions, developing solutions as elegant as they are effective. Among the most mysterious inhabitants of the abyssal zone are the cephalopods, that remarkable group of mollusks that includes squid, octopuses, and their relatives. These intelligent, adaptable animals have conquered every marine environment from tide pools to the deepest trenches, and the abyssal zone hosts some of the strangest and most spectacular species. The colossal squid and the giant squid, though they dwell primarily in the bathyal and lower mesopelagic zones, rather than the true abyss, represent some of the largest invertebrates on Earth and occasionally venture into abyssal depths. The giant squid can reach lengths exceeding 12 meters, much of that length consisting of its feeding tentacles, while the colossal squid, though slightly shorter, is heavier and more robust. Both are apex predators in their depth ranges, hunting fish and smaller squid in the darkness. These massive squid remain largely mysterious despite centuries of human fascination with them. Most of what we know comes from dead specimens, some found washed ashore, others recovered from the stomachs of sperm whales which hunt squid in the deep ocean. Only in recent years have scientists managed to capture video of living giant squid in their natural habitat, and these rare glimpses reveal animals far more graceful and active than dead specimens suggested, moving through the water with powerful pulses of their mantles, their tentacles trailing behind like ribbons. But the abyss also hosts smaller, stranger cephalopods that are in some ways even more remarkable than their giant cousins. The vampire squid, Vampiroteuthis infernalis, whose name translates to vampire squid from hell, might be the most aptly named animal in the ocean. Despite the name, it's not actually a squid, nor is it an octopus, though it shares characteristics with both. It's the only surviving member of its own order, an ancient lineage that provides a window into cephalopod evolution. The vampire squid is small, typically only about 15 centimeters long, with a dark reddish-brown or black body. Its most distinctive feature is a web of skin connecting its arms, like a cloak or cape, which gives it a somewhat sinister appearance when spread. The inside of this web is covered with photophores that can produce brilliant displays of bioluminescent light. When threatened, the vampire squid can invert this web over its body, exposing the light-producing organs while protecting its more delicate internal organs. The display is thought to startle or confuse predators. The vampire squid has the largest eye-to-body size ratio of any animal on Earth. Its eyes can be as large as golf balls on a body the size of a football. Enormous light-gathering organs designed to detect the faintest bioluminescent signals in the darkness. These eyes give the vampire squid exceptional vision in the perpetual night of its habitat. Unlike most squid, which are active predators, the vampire squid is primarily a detritivore. It feeds on marine snow, the constant rain of organic particles from above, using two specialized filaments that extend from between its arms. These filaments are covered in sticky cells that capture particles drifting past. The squid periodically retracts the filaments and scrapes the accumulated material into its mouth. This feeding strategy allows the vampire squid to survive in the oxygen minimum zone, a layer of water with very low oxygen concentrations where most predators cannot venture. By adapting to these harsh conditions, the vampire squid has found a niche with relatively few competitors. Another remarkable deep-sea cephalopod is the telescope octopus, Amphitretus pelagicus, which lives at bathyal and upper abyssal depths in tropical and subtropical oceans. This octopus gets its name from its unusual eyes, which are tubular and point forward, giving it a permanently surprised expression. The tubular eyes, like those of some deep-sea fish, are adapted for gathering maximum light from a specific direction. The telescope octopus is translucent, its internal organs visible through its gelatinous body, an adaptation that provides camouflage in the open water by reducing its visibility. Many deep-sea octopuses have evolved another unusual characteristic. They brood their eggs for extended periods, sometimes years. In the deep sea, where food is scarce and temperatures are cold, eggs develop very slowly. Some deep-sea octopus species have been observed guarding their eggs for over 4 years, the longest known egg brooding period of any animal. During this time, the female typically doesn't feed, surviving on stored energy reserves while protecting her developing offspring from predators and keeping them oxygenated by gently wafting water over them. After the eggs hatch, the exhausted female often dies, having invested everything in giving her offspring the best possible start. The Dumbo octopus, named for ear-like fins on its head that resemble the Disney elephant's ears, represents a group of deep-sea octopuses specially adapted to life on or near the seafloor at extreme depths. These octopuses move by flapping their ear fins and pulsing their webbed arms, drifting through the water like gelatinous ghosts. They've been found at depths exceeding 7,000 meters, making them among the deepest living octopuses. Dumbo octopuses are thought to feed on small invertebrates and worms they find on the seafloor, swallowing prey whole since they lack the hard beaks and radulas of many other cephalopods. Squid in the abyssal zone face similar challenges to other inhabitants, finding food, finding mates, and avoiding becoming food themselves. Many have evolved transparency as a form of camouflage. A transparent body is nearly invisible in the water column, especially in the absence of strong directional light. However, transparency presents a problem. Eyes, which must be pigmented to detect light, cannot be transparent. This is why many transparent squid have eyes that seem to glow or shine. The eyes are the only opaque parts of otherwise invisible animals. Some deep-sea squid produce light, not through symbiotic bacteria, but through their own biochemistry. They can create complex patterns of bioluminescence across their bodies, patterns that might serve for communication, camouflage, or confusing predators. The strawberry squid, for instance, has one small eye that looks downward, used to detect bioluminescent signals from below, and one large eye that looks upward, used to spot the silhouettes of prey against the faint light from above. This asymmetry is unique among animals and demonstrates how evolution can create highly specialized solutions to specific environmental challenges. The hunting strategies of deep-sea squid are as varied as the species themselves. Some drift passively, waiting for prey to come within range of their tentacles. Others actively hunt, using their large eyes to spot prey and their jet propulsion to pursue it. The clubs at the end of their tentacles are often armed with hooks and suckers, sometimes with teeth-like projections that can grip struggling prey. The squid's beak, made of chitin and one of the hardest biological materials known, can tear through flesh and crunch through shells. Cephalopods are among the most intelligent invertebrates, and even deep-sea species show evidence of complex behaviors and problem-solving abilities. They have large brains relative to their body size and highly developed nervous systems. Whether deep-sea cephalopods show the same level of intelligence as their shallow-water cousins remains largely unknown, but observations of their hunting strategies and escape behaviors suggest considerable cognitive sophistication. The life cycle of deep-sea cephalopods typically includes a planktonic larval stage that develops in upper waters where food is more abundant, then a gradual descent to deeper waters as the animal matures. This pattern, common among deep-sea organisms, allows the young to grow quickly in food-rich environments before settling into the energy-poor abyss as adults. The adults, with their slow metabolisms and specialized adaptations, can survive on limited food, but the rapidly growing young could not. Studying deep-sea cephalopods remains challenging. They're difficult to capture alive because the change in pressure during ascent often kills them or damages them so severely they don't survive long enough to study. Most of what we know comes from dead specimens, from observations by submersibles and remotely operated vehicles, and increasingly from video recordings. Each new expedition to the deep sea seems to reveal new species or new behaviors, reminding us how much remains to be discovered about these remarkable animals. The cephalopods of the abyss represent some of evolution's most creative experiments in adapting to extreme environments, from giants to drifters, from transparent jellies to ink-black predators. They've found countless ways to survive and thrive in the darkness, each species a unique solution to the challenges of life without light. The abyssal seafloor itself, that vast plain of soft sediment, supports a community of creatures specially adapted to life on the bottom. These benthic organisms, meaning bottom-dwelling, include some of the strangest-looking animals in the ocean. They scuttle, crawl, and dig through the sediment, some barely moving at all, others covering surprising distances in search of food. Sea spiders, members of the class Pycnogonidae, look like something from a nightmare or science fiction. They're not true spiders, arachnids, but rather a separate group of arthropods that has existed in the oceans for hundreds of millions of years. Deep-sea species can be quite large, with leg spans reaching 1/2 meter or more. Their bodies are tiny in comparison to their legs, so small that there's not enough room for all their internal organs. Some organs, including parts of the digestive system, extend into the legs themselves. Sea spiders move across the seafloor on their long, spindly legs with a slow, deliberate gait. They feed primarily on soft-bodied invertebrates like sea anemones, sponges, and polyps, using a proboscis to suck out the soft tissues of their prey. Some species have been observed feeding on pieces of larger carcasses when they encounter them, demonstrating the opportunistic feeding strategies common in food-poor environments. The adults are typically pale or white, lacking pigmentation since there's no light to hide from or use for visual communication. Sea pigs, members of the sea cucumber family, are among the oddest-looking creatures on the abyssal plain. They resemble chubby pink or purple sausages with multiple leg-like tube feet that they use to walk across the seafloor. Like other sea cucumbers, they're deposit feeders, eating sediment and extracting whatever organic material it contains. They can be remarkably abundant in some areas, with multiple individuals visible in a single camera frame, all slowly moving across the bottom in their search for food. Sea pigs have enlarged tube feet on their dorsal surface that may serve as sensory structures or help circulate water for gas exchange. They've been observed to sometimes congregate around food falls, suggesting they can detect and navigate toward areas of enriched sediment, though how they sense these resources from a distance remains unclear. Their slow movements and patient feeding represent the typical pace of life on the abyssal plain, where energy conservation is essential. Tripod fish, belonging to several genera but most famously Bathypteroids, have evolved a remarkable adaptation for life on the abyssal seafloor. 3 of their fins, the 2 pelvic fins and the lower lobe of the caudal fin, are elongated into stiff rays that act like stilts or a tripod. The fish stands on these rays, positioning itself above the seafloor, with its head facing into the current. This elevated position allows it to detect prey drifting past in the slight currents that flow along the bottom. The tripod fish remains essentially motionless for extended periods, conserving energy while waiting for food to come within range. When it detects prey, likely using highly sensitive lateral line systems and enlarged pectoral fins that may serve as sensory structures, it strikes quickly with its large mouth. The stilted stance keeps the fish above the sediment clouds that its own feeding activities or those of other organisms might create, maintaining clear sensory perception. Tripod fish are hermaphroditic, possessing both male and female reproductive organs. In the vast emptiness of the abyssal plain, where encounters with others of your species are rare, the ability to self-fertilize if necessary provides a backup reproductive strategy, though cross-fertilization with another individual is likely preferred when possible. This adaptation to low population density is common among abyssal organisms. Crustaceans of various types are abundant on the abyssal seafloor, though they're typically much smaller than their shallow water relatives. Amphipods, isopods, and other small crustaceans scuttle through the sediment or drift just above it, feeding on detritus and marine snow. The giant isopod, Bathynomus giganteus, is an exception to the small size rule. These relatives of pillbugs or roly-polies can reach lengths of up to 40 centimeters, making them one of the largest isopods. They're scavengers, feeding on dead fish, whales and squid that sink to the seafloor, able to go long periods without food between carcasses. Abyssal crabs are typically smaller and more delicate than their shallow water counterparts, with thin shells and long spindly legs. These proportions make sense in an environment where predation pressure is relatively low, and where carrying heavy armor requires energy that's better spent on other functions. The crabs scavenge and hunt small prey, picking their way across the sediment in search of food. Certain fish species specialize in life on or near the bottom. Grenadiers or rat-tails, named for their large heads and long tapering tails, are among the most common fish families on the abyssal plain. They swim slowly just above the bottom, using their sensitive barbels, whisker-like structures, to detect prey in the sediment. Their large eyes suggest they rely partly on detecting bioluminescent signals from prey or other fish. The snailfish family includes species that hold depth records for fish, with individuals captured or observed at depths exceeding 8,000 meters, well into the Haddle zone. These fish have gelatinous bodies with minimal bone structure and extremely well-adapted proteins and membranes that function at extreme pressures. They feed on small invertebrates, using their gentle mouths to suck prey from the sediment. Many bottom-dwelling fish have reduced swim bladders or lack them entirely. A swim bladder, the gas-filled organ that many fish use to control buoyancy, becomes problematic at great depths because the gas would be compressed to negligible volume. Instead, abyssal fish often have large, oily livers that provide some buoyancy control, or they simply rest on the bottom and swim in short bursts when necessary, allowing gravity and buoyancy to balance naturally. The seafloor community also includes countless smaller organisms, worms of many types burrowing through the sediment, tiny crustaceans filtering particles from the water, clams and other mollusks buried in the ooze with their siphons extended to feed. Bacteria coat every surface and fill the sediment, breaking down organic matter and recycling nutrients. These smaller organisms, though less dramatic than the larger ones, are essential to the functioning of the abyssal ecosystem, processing the marine snow that falls from above and making its nutrients available to other organisms. In some areas, the abyssal plain is broken by harder surfaces, rocks, ancient lava flows, or manganese nodules, potato-sized lumps of metal-rich minerals that form slowly on the seafloor over millions of years. These hard surfaces provide attachment sites for sessile organisms, creatures that remain in one place. Glass sponges, with their delicate silica skeletons, filter tiny particles from the water. Sea anemones spread their tentacles to capture drifting prey. Stalked crinoids, relatives of sea stars that resemble plants more than animals, wave their feathery arms to filter food from the current. Life on the abyssal seafloor operates at a fundamentally different pace than life in most other environments. Everything happens slowly. A bacterial colony might take decades to establish itself on a rock. A sea cucumber might travel only a few meters in an entire year. A whale carcass supports a community for a century. The turnover of organic matter, the growth of organisms, and the cycling of nutrients all proceed at speeds measured in years rather than days or months. This slow pace makes the abyssal ecosystem particularly vulnerable to disturbance. In shallow water environments, disturbed areas can recover relatively quickly, recolonized by mobile adults or by larvae settling from the plankton. But in the abyss, where reproduction is slow and larval supply is limited, recovery from disturbance can take decades or centuries. Trawl marks from fishing vessels decades old remain visible on the seafloor, the sediment still showing scars where the net passed. Areas where experimental mining has disturbed the bottom show little recovery even after 30 years. The creatures of the abyssal seafloor remind us that life adapts to whatever conditions it encounters. The strange forms and slow lives of these organisms might seem alien to us, but they're perfectly normal for them, the result of millions of years of evolution in a stable, dark, cold environment. They represent successful strategies for life in one of Earth's largest and most stable ecosystems, a realm that will likely continue largely unchanged long after many surface environments have been transformed by climate change or other disturbances. Not all life in the abyss depends on marine snow drifting down from above. In certain locations, usually associated with volcanic activity along mid-ocean ridges, a completely different type of ecosystem exists. One powered, not by sunlight but by chemical energy from the Earth's interior. These are the hydrothermal vent communities, oases of life in the deep sea that depend on chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. Hydrothermal vents form where seawater seeps down through cracks in the oceanic crust, is heated by contact with magma or hot rocks below, and then rises back to the seafloor, carrying dissolved minerals and gases. The water can be superheated to temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius, though it doesn't boil because of the extreme pressure. When this hot, mineral-rich water meets the cold seawater of the abyss, the dissolved minerals precipitate out, forming chimney-like structures that can grow to heights of tens of meters. The rising plume of heated water creates what scientists call a black smoker when the minerals are dark, or a white smoker when they're lighter in color. The chemistry of hydrothermal vent fluids is radically different from normal seawater. The hot water is rich in hydrogen sulfide, methane, hydrogen, and various metals. Most of these chemicals are toxic to ordinary organisms, but specialized bacteria have evolved to use them as energy sources. These chemosynthetic bacteria oxidize hydrogen sulfide or methane, extracting energy that they use to convert carbon dioxide into organic compounds, filling the same role that photosynthetic plants and algae fill in sunlit environments. The bacteria form the base of a complex food web. Some grow as thick mats covering rocks near the vents. Others live in symbiotic relationships with larger animals, residing in specialized tissues and sharing the organic compounds they produce. The abundance of life at hydrothermal vents stands in stark contrast to the surrounding abyssal plain, where the plain might support a handful of small organisms per square meter. The area around a vent can host hundreds or thousands of individuals of multiple species, all thriving on the chemical energy flowing from the Earth's interior. The most iconic hydrothermal vent animal is probably the giant tube worm, Riftia pachytibula. These worms can grow to lengths of over 2 meters, with bright red plumes extending from white tubes. The red color comes from hemoglobin in their blood, specialized to transport both oxygen and hydrogen sulfide, two chemicals that would normally react destructively with each other. The worms have no mouth or digestive system. Instead, they rely entirely on chemosynthetic bacteria living in a specialized organ called the trophosome. The worms absorb hydrogen sulfide from the vent water and oxygen from the surrounding seawater, transport both to the bacteria, and receive organic compounds in return. Vent clams and mussels also host chemosynthetic bacteria, typically in their gills. These bivalves can grow to impressive sizes on the chemical energy, much larger than their relatives living on the abyssal plain. They cluster around vents in dense beds, sometimes covering every available surface. Certain species of shrimp swarm around vent openings, some with specialized heat-resistant proteins that allow them to tolerate temperatures that would cook most organisms. The diversity of life at vents includes many species found nowhere else. Vent-specific gastropods graze on bacterial mats. Blind white crabs patrol the vent periphery. Various fish and octopuses visit vents, though few are strict vent specialists. Some species show remarkable adaptations to the vent environment. Certain vent crabs have bacteria living on their claws, which they wave through the vent fluid to feed the bacteria, then eat the bacteria off their claws, a bizarre farming behavior in the deep sea. Hydrothermal vents are not permanent. They can become inactive when the volcanic heat source shifts or when the cracks that supply water become blocked. Active vents might last for decades or centuries, but eventually they die. When a vent becomes inactive, its specialized community dies off, unable to survive without the chemical energy supply. This makes vent communities inherently temporary, islands of life that appear, flourish, and then vanish. But new vents form elsewhere, and vent organisms must be able to colonize them. This requires dispersal across the abyssal plains between vent fields, sometimes hundreds of kilometers of intervening seafloor. Vent organisms produce larvae that drift in the currents, searching for new active vents. The larvae of some vent species can delay their settlement, remaining in a planktonic state for extended periods while searching for the chemical signatures that indicate an active vent. This is a risky strategy. Most larvae never find a new vent and die, but enough succeed to colonize new sites and maintain the metapopulation. Interestingly, many vent species are also found at cold seeps, areas where methane or hydrogen sulfide seeps up through the seafloor, and at whale falls where decomposing bones produce hydrogen sulfide. This suggests that these three habitat types are connected, with species using each as stepping stones for dispersal. Whale falls, being more common and more widely distributed than vents or seeps, may be particularly important as intermediate habitats, allowing vent species to spread across ocean basins. The discovery of hydrothermal vent communities in the late 1970s was revolutionary. Before that, scientists assumed that all life on Earth ultimately depended on the sun, either directly through photosynthesis or indirectly by consuming photosynthetic organisms. Vents demonstrated that life could thrive on geothermal energy alone, fundamentally changing our understanding of life's possibilities. This discovery has implications for the search for life on other worlds. If life can exist independent of sunlight on Earth, perhaps it could exist in similar environments elsewhere, in the subsurface oceans of icy moons like Europa or Enceladus, where volcanic activity might create conditions similar to Earth's hydrothermal vents. The bacteria themselves that power vent ecosystems are remarkable extremophiles, organisms that thrive in conditions we consider extreme. Some vent bacteria live at temperatures approaching the boiling point of water at sea level. Others tolerate extreme acidity or alkalinity, high concentrations of toxic metals, or other conditions that would destroy most life. Studying these organisms helps us understand the limits of life, the range of conditions under which biological processes can operate. Vent communities remind us that the abyss is not uniform, that within this vast dark realm there are oases of abundance, hotspots powered by the Earth's internal heat rather than the sun's light. They demonstrate that wherever energy is available, in whatever form, life will find a way to use it, to build ecosystems and to thrive. For every large visible organism in the abyss, there are countless billions of microscopic ones, bacteria and archaea. Single-celled organisms without nuclei are the true dominants of the deep sea. They outnumber all other organisms combined, and their collective biomass likely exceeds that of all animals in the abyss. These microbes are the recyclers, the decomposers, the foundation of the entire ecosystem, breaking down organic matter and making its nutrients available to other organisms. Most abyssal bacteria are heterotrophs, feeding on organic matter that drifts down from above or is produced locally. They colonize every surface, from sediment grains to marine snow particles to the bodies of larger organisms. In the water column, bacteria attach to sinking particles, breaking them down as they fall. On the seafloor, bacteria live between sediment grains, processing the organic material mixed in with the inorganic clay and silt. The metabolic rates of these bacteria are incredibly slow by surface standards. In the cold temperatures and low nutrient conditions of the abyss, bacterial cells might divide only once every few months or even once per year, compared to doubling times of minutes or hours for bacteria in nutrient-rich surface waters. But their sheer numbers mean that collectively, they process a significant amount of organic matter, slowly converting complex molecules back into simpler forms that can be used by other organisms. Some abyssal bacteria are chemosynthetic, as we discussed with vent communities, but chemosynthesis occurs in other abyssal settings too. In the sediment, where oxygen becomes depleted just below the surface, bacteria use sulfate, nitrate, or other chemicals as electron acceptors instead of oxygen, breaking down organic matter in anaerobic environments. These processes produce hydrogen sulfide, methane, and other gases that bubble up through the sediment or dissolve in the water. Archaea, once thought to be rare oddities, are now known to be extremely abundant in the deep ocean. These organisms, which resemble bacteria but are genetically distinct enough to constitute their own domain of life, include many species adapted to extreme conditions. Some archaea are among the few organisms that can produce methane methanogens that live in the deepest sediments where conditions are completely anoxic. Recent discoveries have revealed just how diverse and abundant deep-sea microbes are. Genomic studies of water and sediment samples have identified thousands of species, most of which have never been cultured in laboratories. We know they exist only from their DNA sequences, and we can only guess at what they do based on the genes they possess. This hidden diversity, sometimes called microbial dark matter, represents a vast unknown in our understanding of the deep sea. Microbes in the abyss face unique challenges. The high pressure affects their cell membranes and proteins, requiring special adaptations similar to those in larger organisms. The cold temperatures slow their metabolism. The low nutrient availability means they must be extremely efficient at scavenging whatever organic molecules they can find. Despite these challenges, deep-sea microbes thrive, adapted over billions of years to the specific conditions of their environment. Some deep-sea bacteria produce bioluminescence, either on their own or when living symbiotically with animals. The bacteria living in anglerfish lures, for instance, are free-living bacteria that the fish captures and cultivates. These bacteria glow continuously, and the fish controls when the light is visible by covering or uncovering the lure with specialized tissues. Viruses are also abundant in the deep sea, though they're even less understood than bacteria. Viruses infect bacteria and archaea, lysing their cells and releasing their contents into the water. This viral shunt, as it's called, converts living microbial biomass into dissolved organic matter that can be used by other bacteria, creating a short recycling loop that operates independently of larger organisms. The role of microbes in the deep sea extends beyond just breaking down organic matter. They're involved in all the biogeochemical cycles that make life possible. They cycle nitrogen, fixing it from dissolved nitrogen gas or converting it between different oxidized and reduced forms. They cycle sulfur, phosphorus, and various metals. They produce and consume gases that affect ocean chemistry and potentially climate. Though individually microscopic, their collective effects shape the entire ocean ecosystem. Deep-sea sediments contain vast numbers of bacterial cells, sometimes hundreds of millions per cubic centimeter. These cells live incredibly slow lives, buried in the sediment for thousands or millions of years, dividing perhaps once per decade or even less frequently. Some scientists have proposed that these sediment bacteria are essentially dormant, in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the rare input of fresh organic matter that might allow them to become active again. The nature of life at such low energy levels challenges our definitions of what it means to be alive versus merely persistent. Studying deep-sea microbes is technically challenging. Collecting samples without contamination from surface organisms is difficult. Culturing deep-sea microbes in laboratories often fails because we don't yet understand what conditions and nutrients they require. Most of what we know comes from indirect methods, extracting DNA from environmental samples, using that DNA to infer what genes and metabolic capabilities are present, and then making educated guesses about what roles these organisms play. Despite these challenges, our understanding of deep-sea microbiology has advanced dramatically in recent decades. We now know that the deep ocean and its sediments represent one of the largest habitats for microbial life on Earth, comparable in importance to soils or surface ocean waters. The microbes living there are not just survivors, but active participants in global element cycles, affecting everything from carbon storage to nutrient availability to the production of greenhouse gases. The unseen microbial world of the abyss reminds us that the large animals, the anglerfish and squid and sea spiders, are really just the visible tip of a vast biological iceberg. Most of the life in the abyss is microscopic, and most of the biological work, the recycling of elements and the processing of energy, happens at the microbial level. These tiny cells, invisible to our eyes, are the true foundation of the abyssal ecosystem, the base on which everything else depends. The abyss has existed largely unchanged for hundreds of millions of years, a stable environment isolated from the rapid changes that affect surface habitats. But now human activities are beginning to reach even into the deepest parts of the ocean, threatening ecosystems we barely understand. Deep-sea mining represents perhaps the most direct threat. The abyssal plains are rich in mineral resources, particularly polymetallic nodules, potato-sized lumps of manganese, nickel, cobalt, and other metals that form slowly on the seafloor over millions of years. These metals are essential for modern technology, particularly batteries for electric vehicles and renewable energy systems. As demand grows and terrestrial sources become harder to access, interest in deep-sea mining has increased dramatically. Mining nodules from the abyssal seafloor would involve deploying machines that crawl across the bottom, collecting nodules and creating sediment plumes that could spread over large areas. Test mining operations have already been conducted, and the results suggest that the impacts could be severe and long-lasting. The mining machines disturb the sediment, crushing organisms and burying others. The sediment plumes created by mining can travel for kilometers, settling on areas far from the mining site and potentially smothering organisms. But perhaps most concerning is the slow recovery rate. Areas where mining tests were conducted decades ago still show limited recovery. The tracks left by mining equipment remain visible. The communities of organisms in disturbed areas are still different from undisturbed areas, with lower diversity and abundance. In an environment where reproduction is slow and growth is slow, recovery from large-scale disturbance could take centuries or might not happen at all if the disturbance is severe enough. The full ecological impacts of deep-sea mining remain uncertain because we still don't fully understand abyssal ecosystems. We don't know what species are present in most areas, what roles they play, how they interact with each other, or how resilient they are to disturbance. Mining an ecosystem we don't understand risks destroying species we haven't discovered and disrupting ecological processes we don't yet comprehend. Climate change affects even the abyss, despite its isolation from surface conditions. The deep ocean is warming, though much more slowly than surface waters. Changes in surface ocean temperature and chemistry affect the production of organic matter and therefore the amount of marine snow reaching the abyss. In some regions, oxygen levels in the deep ocean have declined, a phenomenon called ocean deoxygenation, which could stress or exclude organisms that require higher oxygen concentrations. Ocean acidification, caused by the ocean absorbing increasing amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, affects the deep sea as well as the surface. The water in the abyss is already slightly acidic, and further acidification could affect organisms that build shells or skeletons from calcium carbonate, potentially dissolving these structures or making them more difficult to build. Changes at the surface inevitably affect the deep sea because of the connection through marine snow and sinking organic matter. Overfishing at the surface reduces the number of large fish, and fewer large fish means fewer large carcasses falling to the abyss. The reduction in whale populations during industrial whaling may have affected whale fall ecosystems, reducing the frequency of these important food sources for abyssal scavengers and specialists. Plastic pollution has reached even the deepest trenches. Microplastics, tiny particles of degraded plastic, have been found in sediments and in the bodies of deep-sea organisms. These plastics can absorb toxic chemicals from seawater, potentially introducing pollutants into deep-sea food webs. They can be mistaken for food particles, entering the digestive systems of animals and potentially affecting their health. The full impacts of deep-sea plastic pollution remain unknown, but the fact that human-made materials have reached the most remote parts of the ocean is sobering. The deep sea is also being affected by noise pollution. Sound travels well through water, and increasing shipping traffic, sonar use, and underwater construction create noise that propagates into the deep ocean. Some deep-sea animals use sound for communication or hunting, and increased background noise could interfere with these activities. The impacts of noise on deep-sea organisms have barely been studied, but analogies to better studied shallow water species suggest there could be significant effects. Perhaps the fundamental threat to the abyssal ecosystem is our ignorance. We've explored more of the surface of the moon than the deep ocean floor. Most of the abyssal zone has never been visited by human eyes or cameras. We discover new species on nearly every expedition to the deep sea. Under these conditions, how can we possibly assess the impacts of mining, fishing, pollution, or climate change? How can we make informed decisions about managing deep-sea resources when we don't know what's there or how it works? There's growing recognition among scientists and some policymakers that we need to proceed cautiously with any activities that could affect the deep ocean. The precautionary principle suggests that when an activity poses potential harm to the environment, the burden of proof should be on those proposing the activity to demonstrate it's safe, rather than on conservationists to prove it's harmful. This principle seems especially relevant for the deep sea, where our knowledge is so limited and where ecosystems might be particularly vulnerable to disturbance. International efforts to protect the deep sea have made some progress. Some areas have been designated as marine protected areas where extractive activities are restricted. There are ongoing discussions about regulating deep-sea mining through international bodies, but protection is far from comprehensive, and political and economic pressures to exploit deep-sea resources remain strong. The abyss has survived meteor impacts, ice ages, and countless other changes over hundreds of millions of years, but it has never faced anything like humanity, a single species with the technological capability to alter ecosystems across the entire planet, from the highest mountains to the deepest ocean trenches. Whether the abyss can survive this new challenge, whether we can learn to value and protect it before we've destroyed what we barely understand, remains one of the great open questions of our time. As we drift back now from the deepest parts of the ocean, ascending slowly through the darkness toward the distant surface, let's pause to marvel at what we've witnessed. The abyssal zone, that vast realm of perpetual night and crushing pressure and ancient cold, is not the barren wasteland it might seem. It's a realm of remarkable life, of creatures so exquisitely adapted to their environment that they seem to belong to another world entirely. We've met the anglerfish, patient hunters wielding living lures in the darkness. We've watched the delicate lights of bioluminescent creatures drifting through the water like stars in an inverted sky. We've witnessed the transformation of a fallen whale into a thriving oasis, supporting thousands of lives over decades. We've glimpsed the strange beauty of sea spiders and sea pigs, of glass sponges and tube worms, each one a masterpiece of evolution. These creatures remind us that life is extraordinarily creative, finding solutions to challenges that seem insurmountable. They show us that beauty exists in forms we never imagined, that intelligence and adaptation and success come in countless varieties. They demonstrate that even in the most extreme environments, even in places of darkness and scarcity and immense pressure, life finds a way not just to survive but to create complex, intricate ecosystems. The abyss teaches us humility. It reminds us how much of Earth remains unknown, how many mysteries still wait in the largest habitat on our planet. It shows us that our knowledge, for all our technology and science, is still limited, that we're still explorers on our own world, still discovering new species and new processes and new wonders. And perhaps most importantly, the abyss reminds us of our connection to all parts of the ocean. What happens at the surface affects the deepest depths. The plankton we cannot see feeds the whales that eventually sink to become gardens of life on the abyssal plain. The carbon we release into the atmosphere alters the chemistry of the deepest ocean trenches. Everything is connected, surface to abyss, land to sea, life to life. As you rest now, as your breathing deepens and your thoughts begin to blur into dreams, carry with you an image of the abyss, not as a dark, frightening place, but as a realm of quiet beauty, of patient lives unfolding in the darkness, of communities thriving where we once thought nothing could survive. Picture the gentle lights drifting through the water, the slow dance of sea spiders across the ancient sediment, the patient anglerfish waiting for its glowing lure to attract the next meal. You are part of this same world, connected by water and air and the great cycles of life that connect all things. The oxygen in your breath was produced by plankton in the sunlit ocean. The calcium in your bones came from the same ocean that dissolved and redistributed minerals across the abyssal plains. Your existence is woven into the same fabric as the vampire squid and the giant tube worm. All of us children of the same ancient Earth, all of us sustained by the same planetary systems. Rest now, and let the quiet mysteries of the abyss carry you gently into sleep. The deep ocean will continue its slow, ancient rhythms, undisturbed by our presence, its creatures living their strange and beautiful lives in the darkness. And somewhere in that vastness, life persists, adapts, and thrives, a testament to the remarkable resilience and creativity of the living world. May you find the same peace in your rest that exists in the still waters of the abyss, where time moves slowly and life proceeds with patient grace. May your dreams be gentle, drifting through dark waters, lit by occasional flashes of bioluminescent beauty. And may you wake refreshed, carrying with you a sense of wonder at the remarkable world we inhabit, a world of mysteries and marvels from the highest peaks to the deepest ocean trenches. Sleep well, ocean dreamer, the abyss abides.